thing about tonight. Tonight, over at the Meeman Center, we have two events this week, okay? At the Meeman Center tonight is a discussion, if you're interested in coming, about a novel by Naguib Mahfouz, an Egyptian Nobel laureate who wrote a fascinating trilogy called the Cairo Trilogy. It's the third installment it's about the third novel in this thing. If you want to come and join in the conversation, you can, just like the last one. I mean, if you haven't read the novel or don't know anything about it, it might be interesting, even if you haven't. And then on Wednesday, we have another opportunity, same time, over at the Meeman Center for, so if you can get a little snack beforehand, it's 5, but it starts at 5:30. And that is, it's on the Apology. And the Apology of Plato. And you will hear, just as sort of teaser, arguments why they should have put him to death. Okay?
Plato?
Socrates. Okay. All right, good. And I saw some of your posts from the ones that were there before. Yes?
So the one Monday night, next Monday, is that going to be the same thing as tonight, or if we attend both of those for the same?
You can attend them both. They're going to be slightly different.
And they're both extra credit?
Both extra credit.
Sweet.
Yep. Okay. All right, Isabel, it's all you.
Okay.
Are we starting?
Discussion
Okay, good.
will focus on the assertion that Matthew supports and promotes Paul's version of Christianity while downplaying others and even discrediting others. For discussion, be prepared to identify for the class specific instances where Matthew presents ideas that you have encountered in the letters of Paul. Conversely, be prepared to discuss evidence of rival views and conflicts. So, I want everyone to participate, and I am going to call on people in shows. Let's start.
You ain't always too good with it.
Who wants to go? Wow, I'm maybe.
I'll start. I think that the big thing here is how there are instances in which Matthew, the author of the Gospel of Matthew, does tend to agree with Paul on something such as the detail on marriage, with how marriage isn't for everyone, and the rules find divorce for that, and that is on page. Should have looked before talking. It's in his second Discord.
Pass the ball, Zach, until you can find it.
Who wants to go next?
Who wants to go next? Okay, Anna. You want to go next?
That's fine. I think just one of the most direct connections I saw between like Paul's letters and the Gospel of Matthew was like in Matthew he says, see chapter 3 verse 11, he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire, and then that's like directly connected to like Acts 1 verse 5, which is going to be hard to find. It's a long way. But when they have like the tongues of fire and they get like baptized with the Holy Spirit, you know. And then in like Acts 2, verse 3 through 4, none of these things I can find right now, but I have them written down.
Good.
So that was like a direct correlation I saw, and I thought that's interesting. It kind of ties into like the dichotomy of like flesh and spirit that they both talk about, and like becoming saved through baptism.
Was his wife, or is that only if chastity, such as case of his wife, so they're not married, but he says that everyone can accept his teaching, but when this is given, so marriage is not for everybody. And in the letter to Corinthians, Paul writes in chapter 7, verses 1 through 2, and also 15, about marriage and no divorce, but it doesn't mean that he's circumcised. His details about that, which parallels with what the author of Matthew said in chapter 19.
Kind of going back to what you were saying about the body and the flesh in Corinthians 12, verse 13, he says, "For in the one spirit we were all baptized into one body, and were made to drink one spirit." And Paul talks a lot about how the body is a temple. And then if we go back to Matthew, first of all, Jesus is healing people, and like by healing people and healing physical bodies, he's kind of healing the spiritual body of the church, so he's covering like spiritual and physical bodies. And there's still a big focus on the physical body, especially in chapter 6, verse 22, when he's talking about the eye is the lamp of the body, so if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. And I think it's interesting, the spiritual and the physical, and how they're very closely intertwined, and both really seem to include those things.
Kind of going right along with what India and Zach said. Excuse me. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 1, it says, "Beware practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward for your Father in heaven." And I found in Romans chapter 2, verse 28, when Paul is talking about circumcision, he sort of says, "For a person is not a Jew who is one outwardly, nor is true circumcision something external and physical." So I think that both of these authors pay a lot of attention to not seeking rewards and praise from fellow men, but instead from God.
I don't think the circumcision argument is as much about like seeking like God's approval as it is about like following these old Jewish rules
Mhm.
and like trying to figure out like if they're gonna keep with the like traditions or like do their own thing. And I could probably support this with text, but I don't have anything written down right now.
Do you mean that like they're trying to decide, like that was like a debate that they were having when they were talking about circumcision? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like it's part of the like greater debate of like what do we keep from Judaism and what do we.
Sorry, I was.
Also going off of like the spirit and body concept, I think that they like Paul and Matthew both put like an emphasis over like the spirit though. In chapter 18, verse 8 it says, "If your hand or foot causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away." And then later on in verse 9 it says, "It is better for you to enter life with one eye than to have two eyes and be thrown into the hell of fire." So I think it's better to be like spiritually like present than physically. We're both really very important.
Yeah, going back to what Hannah was saying about trying to figure out like what laws religion like to do. Matthew chapter 19 verse 18 says you shall not, and Jesus said, "You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, honor your father and mother. Also, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." The young man said to him, "I have kept all of these, what do I still lack?" Jesus said to him, "If you wish to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give the money to the poor. You will have treasure in heaven, then come follow me." So I think that really like outlines and like displays how he does want them to like follow the laws, but he also wants them to be like that's like just not enough. By just following the laws, you actually need to like be dedicated to Jesus and the Holy Spirit.
And on top of that, I saw a correlation between, I feel like Paul and Jesus were both preaching that in accordance with the law of righteousness is also important. And that's seen in Romans 4, verse 13. It says, when they're talking about how circumcision is no longer like necessary, it says, "For the promise that he would inherit the world did not come to Abraham or to his descendants through the law, but through the righteousness of faith." And then Matthew 5, there's a lot about like you have heard that it was said to those in times to not murder, and like you should not commit adultery. You've heard those said an eye for an eye, and then tooth for a tooth. but he also says that he says there's a greater significance to these 10 commandments because he goes along and says like, do not resist an evil doer, but if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. So it's like a sense of righteousness along with the law is what's important.
So I found another something like a point of contention, I guess, between the two. In Matthew 15, verse 10, it says, then he called, talking about like eating. It says, then he called the crowd to him and said to them, listen and understand, it is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but it is what comes out of the mouth that defiles. And then if you go down to 17, it says, do you not see that whatever goes into the mouth enters the stomach and it goes out into the sewer? But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this is what defiles. And then if you go to the letter to the Corinthians, 11:28 says, but if someone says to you, this is an offering sacrifice, then do not eat it out of consideration for the one who informed you and considered conscious. So I guess Jesus is just kind of putting stress that like it's not, the food really isn't what matters as long as you're eating dessert. Stuff like that was really
So continuing from what Zaria was saying, that in chapter 3 of Romans, Paul actually says that they should continue to circumcise because, so he says literally we uphold the law. So 3:31. And then earlier in chapter 3, verse 20 and 21. So no human being will be justified in his sight, but he's prescribed by the law, for the law comes the knowledge of sin. And then in 21 it says, but now apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been disclosed and is attested by the law and the prophets. So that, affirms that it isn't just the law you have to follow, but there's more to it than that. And then also talks about how Paul is in favor of keeping circumcision.
Okay, all right, okay, time out. No, Paul is not in favor of keeping circumcision. He's talking about himself as a Jew who has followed the law of Moses, and he continues to do that. But his mission is to the Gentiles, for which circumcision no longer applies.
Why does it say we?
Because he is a Jew.
Right, but he's writing a letter to the Romans, so the we, to me, would include
No.
him.
Everything that you have read in the letters of Paul brings a cessation to the law of Moses. Okay, all right. So that's very important because this is crucial because Paul is not is expanding this beyond a Jewish sect.
Right.
Okay. So the concept of circumcision might apply to him as a Jew because that's who he was, but no longer.
Okay. Well, that's what I interpreted from the we. He didn't say I. He said we.
Well, okay, but if you read the rest of Romans and the Corinthians, you will see that circumcision is off the table. No more circumcision. That is not a requirement. Okay. And let me come back to Will. I just want to comment on this, that this is not a point of contention at all. This is actually a confirmation of that, a corroboration. Because Paul says it doesn't, what one eats doesn't matter anymore. What matters is offending a fellow believer. Okay? Because he says, even slightly before the passage that you read, that it doesn't matter what one eats any longer. And this is what Jesus is saying too. So Jesus, and remember that the Gospel of Matthew is after the letters of Paul. So this is a corroboration of so it's not a contention, but it's a corroboration.
Kind of going off of what Professor Morrell said and what Will said. I saw in Matthew 4, verse 2 to 5, when the devil is testing Jesus and everything else, or Satan is testing Jesus. He does have this kind of theme of saying, very stoic, where he's saying you don't necessarily need to eat. You don't have to be hungry so long as you have the word of the Lord and so long as you are complying and being a faithful, pious individual. So I just thought that was kind of a further corroboration of what you guys were saying.
Yeah, then another point which there seems to be a parallel between Matthew and Paul is in instructions Paul wrote before the Gospel of Matthew and Romans, chapter 13. Talks about let every person be subject to the governing authorities. For there's no authority except from God. Those authorities that exist have been instituted by God. Then Matthew, chapter 22, verse 21, it says in verse 15, right before that, that the Pharisees went to talk to and trap him, according to Jesus, what he said. Then it goes down to verse 21, where they say, Jesus responds to their claim of like, whose head is this, and whose title, talking about the coin that they put to him. And he said, because they answered the emperors, and he said to them, give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperors, and to God the things that are God's. When they heard this, they were amazed and left them away. So I think that's another example of which Paul and the author of Gospel of Matthew are agreeing. Their focus on the authority of God, right? Political authority, but not really like, in a sense, like focus on rejecting or just focus on God, obey political authority laws instead.
Zach is comparing Romans and Matthew, and a lot of people have been comparing Romans and Matthew. And I found those comparisons especially interesting because last time we talked about how Romans, since he was writing to people he didn't really know, he was kind of stating what he believed versus in like letters to Corinthians, he was specifically stating stuff to Corinth. So Romans is kind of like an overall generalization of what he believes. So I found that to be especially useful with this topic of discussion. And one example, like a lot of people have been giving Romans and Matthew examples, but another one is in Matthew 7, it says, do not judge so that you may not be judged. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged, and the measure you get will be the measurement you get. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your neighbor, let me take the speck out of your eye, while the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. And in Romans, let's see.
What was that? Chapter 8, verse?
That was verse 7.
Very beginning.
And Romans says.
You looking for chapter 2?
Yeah.
Chapter 2, verse 1.
Sorry. I found it. And then it went away. Do you want to read it?
Yeah. It says, therefore you have no excuse, whoever you are, when you judge others, for in passing judgment on another, you condemn yourself, because you, the judge, are doing the very same thing.
Right, and so that literally says the exact same thing. Because here he's saying if you judge others, then you're passing judgment on yourself. And here in Matthew, it says, with the judgment you make, you will be judged. So that's literally like the exact same thing in different words, which I found interesting.
And I kind of interpreted that as another like corroboration, just basically saying that like, I don't know, I saw it as like less of an emphasis on like being obligated to be concerned with like the morals of others, and it's more of like an emphasis on like morals like just of yourself. Because and just like what she was saying, it says, why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but you do not notice the log in your own eye? So it's pretty much saying like both the chapters, hey, let's be concerned with our own actions and not so much concerns about others, like necessarily what they're eating, circumcision. So I just saw that as more like self kind of thing.
Amelia, did you have a comment?
Yeah, those were the two passages I was going to read.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Another similarity between Matthew and Romans. This has to do with like death and life. In Matthew 16, verse 25, he says, for those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. And in Romans 6, verse 11, he says, so you also must consider yourselves dead to sin and alive to God in Christ Jesus. So this whole underlying point is like, the whole reason you're alive is to live for God.
Well, I'd like to go back to what he was talking about in verse 2 of Romans, and the whole idea that you're not supposed to judge others and more prepare yourself. And we see kind of that same thing in Matthew 7-24, where Jesus is saying Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on the house, and did not fall because it had been founded on rock. And I think that's a good metaphor for what he's trying to get at, is that you're supposed to establish yourself under God rather than judge others.
Anyone else want to comment? Okay, what about the roles of faith in Matthew and all of different Paul's letters?
Are we talking about the consequences of faith?
Anything. There's a lot about faith in Matthew. That's a big emphasis. Like he always is like, of course I don't have this, but he's like, you need to be faithful, and he performs miracles. Jesus performs miracles when people believe that he can, not to prove to people. You know what I mean? But like when they already believe, that's when he'll help them out. So, and that's like a big point. And there's also stuff about faith in Paul's letters. Or anything else.
That's like Matthew 4, just it kind of shows faith when Jesus was tested. At one point it says, Matthew 4 verse 7, do not go to the Lord your God to test. So basically I think that interprets like when it comes to faith, you just have to, like the idea of faith is just give it wholly and don't like expect like proof in return.
Yeah, to connect that quickly to Paul, letter to Romans chapter 4 verse 1 through 9, it talks about Abraham as the ancestor of the faithful, and how the faith was greater than the works. And talking about like how faith is reckoned to him before circumcision, to emphasize like how he's already spiritually circumcised, so that came first, and then God's kind of grace upon him for that, as a result of having the faith prior.
I don't know, I just kind of wanted to connect it to the Roman text that we've been reading. You know, I mean, I think you can definitely see a lot of Stoic aspects in all of this writing. You know, they're talking about how faith comes from within, again, with the whole devil's or Satan's testing of Jesus. You know, how he comes to followers, Jesus, that actively have their own belief already. They're not trying to seek faith out of him. You know, they already have their belief, and he's kind of coming and validating and helping them. So I really see that as kind of Seneca's Stoic, where, all right, first everything comes from my validation of within. So I can definitely see the Roman culture and thought permeating through even to Matthew and a lot of these other texts.
I think that something I found interesting was thinking about Judas's faith and whether that was like legitimate faith or not. And so, you know, the part in Matthew 27 where he goes and kills himself, it says, when Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, blah, 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 he departed and he went and hanged himself. I found in Romans 6, the very beginning, it says, what then are we to say? Should we continue to sin in order that grace may abound? By no means. How can we who died to sin go on living in it? And I think that Judas is kind of a struggle for me because he's one of the disciples, but he sinned so greatly against, he's like the sinner, but he still wasn't able to live in his own sin. Does that make him a faithful man? I don't know.
We also kind of breezed over like why he betrayed Jesus. Like, I know, but it was like one sentence. Like, there's gotta be, come on, like what the hell? I'm so confused.
This is conjecture, and you can feel free to take it or leave it. But I was actually thinking about this when I was reading it, and in like before Judas gives Jesus up, Jesus has already told them that he's going to die in this way, and like this is going to happen. And so my thinking was maybe Judas knows this is going to happen, knows he can get silver out of it, and that doesn't necessarily mean that he doesn't believe in Jesus, but if it's gonna happen and he can make some money off of it, he might as well. That doesn't make him a good person, obviously, but that was my train of thought. You don't have to believe that, but.
But I think it's a really cool thought that if he were to know it's going to happen, then why would he hate himself? Like, again, assuming that he already like understood it and accepted it, then why would he just have that himself? Like obviously.
Because then it happened.
Yeah, but like if he
And
already
also-
knew it was going to happen.
We don't know if he actually understood the whole implications of it either, or anything like that. Because it's obviously his greed was before.
Yeah, but if he hadn't understood it, then why would he slow him out?
If he hadn't understood it,
Yeah, like you said, he didn't understand.
I don't know, I'm saying like even if he did it, didn't.
It's like in order, like, assuming this train of thought, in order to think that that's the reason that you sold Jesus out, because he was gonna happen, it seems to get a pretty strong grasp of that.
So the whole thing is that we already know if.
I know, but this is basically on the.
This is just my hypothesis.
Yeah, I'm just trying to.
Well, you can answer
It's not
that question, but sure.
Well, I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
okay, regardless of that, if we are considering Judas' faith, the fact that he did this for silver is like in direct violation of like so much of what Jesus teaches, which is why like he may have been faithful, but obviously he's kind of dumb. Like I don't know how he like justified this to himself, but
I don't really see, I don't know, this is conjecture too, but I don't really see Judas. It reminds me of the Iliad and the Aeneid when like fate is totally out of your control. And I think that like what you're saying is right about it was gonna happen anyways. So I don't even really see him as like a real person necessarily, you know, like he was just kind of a tool almost, and like a vehicle for God to intervene, and like it had to be done in this certain way. And it's, you know, convenient that it happened this way because it teaches us a lesson too. I don't know. He doesn't have control of his own life, obviously, because it was going to happen anyways.
Yeah. Also, like a lot of stuff in the Bible is, I'm not saying that this is necessarily exaggerated, but like a lot of stuff happens because Jesus' parables, they're not real, but they're to tell story and to help you like find your faithful way. And so I'm not saying that's necessarily what happened here, but that's also a thought to consider. Yeah.
Right, and that's kind of what the last plenary professor said about all of this. I remember him saying that the people who are writing the Gospels are more concerned about teaching lessons and showing the character of Jesus as opposed to getting things historically accurate.
I want to go back and just understand something about what India said when we said that Jesus is like no control over his actions because we think that this is happening like for like a certain, like for it to happen. Does that mean that no one has control over anything?
I mean,
Or
that's
just
another
Judas?
question.
Because that brings up a whole different like dimension.
Yeah. And then when you think about like
I don't know if
I just feel like when we analyze like the Aeneid and stuff, like fate was a really big aspect, but I like it's just hard to like because like we're like you like by stating this like we're directly touching on the whole like free will aspect,
right?
And so it's just like I don't know, like within the context of what we're talking about, I think it's two different things to talk about, like that he couldn't do it and the fact that he did do it, because we're just arguing two different things. Like one's arguing like none of this has control, it's all just done by fate, and the other is like we're actually talking about like the people and the actions of what happened. Because I feel like it makes a lot of it kind of insignificant, and just a lot less like it's really much harder for people to internalize with it. I feel like if it were stated that none of these people have control over what they're doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that's something Jesus talks about a lot too, is like, or at least what I was getting from Paul is the importance of choice. But something that Professor Morales said a lot, at least when we were talking about the Aeneid, is like, can you have partial control over your life? Or, I don't know.
Right, fate versus free will.
Right.
Which is.
I feel like we should let this one
It's just
go.
a, yeah, it's just
Yeah.
a point of thing.
Real
Actually-
point. Point. Yeah, wait.
Yeah,
We both have.
yeah, we both wanted to say
Okay.
something for like.
Okay,
We could chime in after this.
I would like to move back to the discussion topic, but if you guys would like to say your things quickly, then we can move back.
Okay, so then I'll say it quickly. Basically, Matthew is all addressed to the Jews and everything else, and it's emphasizing the messianic kind of deity nature of Jesus. So of course they're going to emphasize this whole faith aspect and everything else. It's very clear because they are kind of coming back to the Old Testament and all this other stuff. And they're basically saying, yes, Jesus is the Son of God. He's not the Son of Man in Matthew so much. They're emphasizing all of these deity kind of acts, these miracles.
When Will brought up the Aeneid, I thought of, in the Aeneid, we talked, one of the possibilities was that fate was God-driven, and that the only force that could interfere with a god's actions is another god's actions. So in the New Testament, the Old Testament, since there's only one God, it's once he makes actions, only in the Jewish Bible, I don't know I haven't read this in the traditional language, but it's always referred to as male. So once he makes an action, only he can reverse it. So I feel like if there is if this is faith-based, I think it's more final than it would have been because there's only one there as opposed to multiple.
Well, the faiths and the Aeneid are gods that other gods cannot contend with. Like that, the thing about fate is that like even gods are subject to it. Like it's not like gods don't decide fate.
I was talking
Fate
about
decides
like
fate.
there's one instance where they're racing and one of the gods tries to interfere with the race and Poseidon says, "No, this is my territory," and stops it. I'm not explaining this
Yeah,
eloquently.
but that's not fate. That's just actions.
Okay. To me,
Okay. So, sorry, I just think we should move back to the discussion topic. Does anyone have more comparisons between Paul? Or we haven't really talked about anything that is different between the two, if anyone wants to bring any of that up.
I kind of want to talk about the difference, and I don't know. I just kind of saw like in the letters from Paul, it's more of like a discussion. Like he doesn't necessarily have any like specific. It's more like fear-inducing in order to gain followers and kind of convince people. Whereas in the book of Matthew, I see just the demonstration of like extraordinary feats as a means to gain, I guess, followers in a sense. So fear versus these extraordinary feats, because there's not too much like just causing fear in the subjects within Matthew. It's more just showing them how awesome God is and essentially what the capacity of what he can do.
But there's still the whole apocalypse thing that goes on. So if you get to Matthew 24, Jesus talks like extensively about verse 31. He will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds. 35, heaven and earth will pass away, but my word will not pass away. One will be taken and one will be left. 44, there you must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour, which confirms, which I think is kind of scary, but that kind of confirms 1 Corinthians 15 when even mentions in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, the last trumpet, the dead will be raised. Just confirmation.
I would like to say that there are definitely aspects in this in Matthew of like kind of fear-inducing tactics. Like in Matthew 21, verse 33, it's talking about the landowner who planted the vineyard, and it's talking about how the tenants would kill the slaves and kill his son. And then if you get to 42, it says, Jesus said to them, "Have you never read in the scriptures, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone? This was the Lord's doing, and was amazing in our eyes. Therefore I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people that produces the fruits of the kingdom. The one who falls on the stone will be broken to pieces, and it will crush anyone on whom it falls." So I would definitely say there's a bit of fear-inducing.
One thing that I find interesting is that since Matthew was written afterwards, it's kind of interesting that he's talking more specifically about Jesus's life, whereas Paul is talking more about philosophy. It makes sense because Paul's kind of trying to start the religion, but also it's interesting that like the narration of Jesus' life happens later than just talking about like philosophy, because like how factual based is it when it's later? That didn't make any sense. Does anyone know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
No?
Absolutely.
Okay, sorry, I was not
One's
making
preach,
words.
one's, has context involved.
Which I found interesting about like the time. Yeah.
This doesn't really relate particularly to that, but what I found interesting was like throughout all of these texts, there's a lot of like plant metaphors and stories, and like that's like a very, very consistent theme, and I think it's something worth discussing because I wasn't really sure
I kind of saw something a little bit.
why that was such a thing.
I saw something kind of related to that in Corinthians 10, where they're talking about like don't worship false idols, and he has this whole part, a couple paragraphs going on about, which ends with like, therefore, my dear friends, flee from the worship of idols. And there's the whole part in chapter 8 before that where he's discussing like food and sacrifice concerning these idols, which he would consider to be false. In Matthew 7:15, Jesus kind of just directly says, where are these false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves? You will know them by their fruits. And I thought that was kind of interesting because it's like you will know them by their fruits, which kind of relates back to like the fruits or the food of these false idols that are referred to in Corinthians, and also kind of ties in with the plant metaphor that you're talking about. And so like there's a direct link there, but I think it's interesting how Jesus is like saying, beware of this in a more general sense, and then Paul in Corinthians is saying, well, watch out for these specifically, like concerning sacrifices and food in these ceremonies, concerning these false idols. And it's kind of like Paul has taken what Jesus had been preaching in a general sense and applied it to a specific circumstance, which I thought was kind of interesting and cool to see how the religion was taking shape in a more active and kind of it's not the right word, human form, I guess, in a real life situation rather than just something that's abstract.
Seeing the philosophies of Paul.
Yeah.
To answer your thing about all plants, parables, the third discourse is when he talks about it, chapter 13 of Matthew. He talks about it in the footnotes after he gives off the parable. The first one being about different types of seed, like different places to go to seed. The second one, the weeds going with them. And the third, mustard seed. And fourth is about the yeast. And the little footnotes talks about the third discourse, and it says how four of the parables in this chapter, one of the interpretations are unique to Matthew. The theme of growth in the first four parables emphasizes the inexorable expansion of the kingdom. So this kind of unstoppable growth of the kingdom that's occurring. And with Paul, I also thought the connection here is interesting since Matthew tends to be emphasizing the Jewish Messiah, and like he begins the Gospel of Matthew with this whole genealogy of Jesus, traced from Abraham to David, and then to Jesus through Joseph. And it's even more interesting to me with how in Paul, in his letter to the Romans, he talks about how with the power of God, this is verse 16, chapter 1, verse 16 of letter to the Romans, the power of God for salvation to everyone who has faith, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. And then in Matthew, in the second discourse, he stresses this whole Jewish Messiah thing, but it says in the footnotes in the second discourse how this discourse appears to reflect both the time of Jesus and that of the church. And while Jesus delimits the disciples' mission to the people of Israel, the discourse goes on to speak of a later phase where the disciples were dragged before governors and provided testimony to the Gentiles. Even though I marked down like 3 times in which he calls out, like Jesus call out the Gentiles, and like in chapter 6, verse 32 is the third time he does so. And I think there's might be a slight difference in that sense, maybe, between Paul and Matthew, because it's just weird how he goes from this emphasis on the Jewish salvation and then to the Gentiles, especially with how he ends the Gospel of Matthew in saying like how what Jesus says, go therefore make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded you. And that kind of weird teeter-totter there is an interesting subject.
We're getting towards the end of class. I was wondering if you had any questions.
I thought you have identified some really interesting parallels. Let me just come back to what Zach says. I mean, he noted that at the beginning of Matthew, we have the genealogy. And this is perfectly Pauline, right? Because he says, look, it's through the lineage of Abraham, right, that the Messiah has come. And he ends with, now go out to all nations of the world. This is Paul in a nutshell. It's entirely Pauline, okay, that this is for something else. So I think that you have seen that. Just a couple of really interesting things coming back to, I think, a point that Ben wanted to flesh out a little bit, and that is the issue with the place. What is the role of the law of Moses in this? And we have seen repeatedly in Matthew that certain aspects of the law of Moses continue to hold, right? For example, the what? No.
Continue to what?
The 10 Commandments, for example, right? Yeah, no. To continue to hold, right? So the 10 Commandments, they are still operative, right? There's not been a change in that. But other things are not, okay? So we see where there are, so this is a point of contention, because all of the people who come from a Jewish tradition are asking themselves, okay, wait, which of the hundreds of laws that we observe are still in force and which aren't? Okay. So we've got to try to figure out what's going on here in terms of that. But for the new and for this new generation who are, the Gentiles, they're also wondering, well, this looks like a Jewish sect, what is really involved in participating in that? So I think this is a big issue that is working there. Let me come back, just two quick things. Fate, how is fate represented in this? Paul says at the very beginning of Romans, okay, remember the beginning of Romans, he says what? Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, set apart for the gospel of God, which he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures. We see here fate manifested in prophecy, right? In the Scriptures, okay? So, and it's all over in Matthew.
This fulfills this.
It's exactly right, including the point with Judah. All right, so one last thing to look at, because the assignment for Wednesday is going to be the Gospel of John. One of the issues that comes up, and you've pointed out, the duality between the spirit, the physical being, and the spiritual aspect. I want you to be thinking about, what does Paul envision this resurrection to be? Because this is a very crucial point, because I think that Paul has a very clear idea about what this is going to be. I don't think it's entirely what we think when we imagine the resurrection. Okay, so keep an eye open for that. All right, thank you very much. Well done.